I used to think there'd always be room for me, even if I arrived late. The ribbon around the box had come undone somewhere between the highway and the gravel turnoff, but I retied it before stepping out. It was white satin creased now, with one faint stain on the corner from the coffee that sloshed in my cup holder. I wiped it gently with the sleeve of my coat. Not that it mattered. The house stood behind iron gates, tall and quiet. A red SUV idled inside, probably Savannah's. The driveway lights flickered on as if they recognized the motion sensor, just not me. I stepped closer. Nothing happened. The gate didn't move. There used to be a keypad, but it had been replaced with a remote access system last fall. I knew that, only because I'd offered to help split the cost. No one replied. A voice came from the side path, soft, familiar. "You're not on the list, Miss Vaughn." "I'm sorry." She didn't make eye contact. Her apron looked new, a different shade than the ones she wore when I was still part of holiday mornings and forgotten chores. I nodded once. Didn't argue. The box in my hand felt heavier than it should. I checked my phone. 1 bar of signal. No new texts. I opened the family group chat out of reflex. There was no group, just my name floating in the recent thread as if the house had swallowed the rest. I tried calling Mom, straight to voicemail. I tried Savannah, rang once, ended. Rain started as a mist, then softened into something steadier, the kind that soaks the edges, first coat hem, then collar, then the back of your knees. I stood there, thumb pressed against the corner of the gift box, watching the water spread into the paper like ink. There was a time when I would have knocked anyway. There's no space for her at the table, I had once overheard Mom tell a neighbor. She doesn't quite match the tone of the evening. I hadn't known I had a tone. Another drop hit the corner of my left eye. Or maybe it didn't. Hard to tell in that light. I adjusted the ribbon one last time, not to protect the gift, just to keep my hands from looking useless. Then I turned. Not because I gave up, but because something in me, quiet and old, knew that gate wasn't broken. It was locked, deliberately. And my name had been erased long before the list was printed. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, someone would fill the silence with understanding. The envelope was still in the glove box, cream cardstock, gold foil edging. I'd written her name in cursive, slow and careful like handwriting could make something matter. I never gave it to her. It stayed there through 3 oil changes and 1 tire rotation. The gift sat in the back seat, untouched. I hadn't decided whether to bring it inside or leave it at the gate. I ended up doing neither. When I was 12, Savannah won a county science award for a project we built together. She told the judges she'd done it alone. You don't mind, do you? You're better behind the scenes anyway. That same year, I dropped out of student council to help Mom with the church benefit. She forgot to mention me in her speech. It's just easier to keep things streamlined. At 17, I skipped a weekend at the shelter to attend one of her book club brunches. Try not to talk too much. The women prefer charm over opinions. I remember standing behind the kitchen island folding napkins while Savannah described a non-profit idea I'd scribbled in a notebook weeks before. She has no sense of scale, Mom told a guest. Her head's always in little ideas. I didn't interrupt. Dad, well, Douglas once looked up from his paper during a family breakfast and said, "You're not as clever as you think you are, kid. You're just quiet enough that people forget to correct you." I still passed him the orange juice like he hadn't spoken. That became a habit, staying useful, just enough to stay visible. There's a photograph in Mom's hallway Christmas morning, 5 of them on the couch, mugs, raised matching pajamas. I took the picture, There's a gap at the end of the frame like they saved a spot, but it's just throw pillows stacked on one side. In all of it, I kept hoping for some kind of return, that if I made myself small enough, compliant enough, I'd be granted space without asking for it. But the thing about shrinking is that eventually you vanish, and sometimes they like it better that way. I used to believe forgetting was something that happened over time. Now, I think some things are just left out on purpose. The drawer under the bookshelf stuck a little, like it didn't want to be opened. Inside was a tangle of old envelopes, folded clippings, a wool scarf in dark green that still smelled faintly of cedar. I ran my fingers along the fringe. One thread had come loose at the edge, curled like it had been waiting. There was a stack of holiday cards bundled together with a red ribbon. Most had gold script, glittery edges, names inked in my mother's hand. To Savannah, for your grace and brilliance. To Douglas, my anchor through every storm. To Katie, Merry Christmas. M's. Just the initial. Neat and personal, as if even my name took up too much space. Beneath them was a yellowed newspaper clipping, a feature story on a local writing competition. My photo sat in the top right corner, blurry, but mine. We'll skip that page, Mom had told the server at brunch. It's a fluff piece. No one at the table asked how it felt to see my name in print. Savannah had changed the subject to renovations. Another photo slid out from behind the article last year's family gala. Everyone dressed in navy and silver. Savannah stood at the center, holding the plaque for community innovation. She smiled like she meant it. I'd taken the picture. My corner of the frame had been trimmed off. Let's keep it clean, she had said, holding the scissors over the photo album. You didn't look quite event ready. I turned the frame over. A piece of tape still clung to the back, folded and useless. Somewhere deeper in the drawer was a birthday card addressed to me unopened. I'd found it tucked behind a casserole dish weeks after my 25th. The handwriting was Savannah's. Hope it's not one of those years where you get too reflective. I slid the scarf into my lap and pressed my thumb against the roughest stitch. Aunt Rosemary used to say mistakes in the yarn made it warmer. I don't know if that was true, but hers was the only gift that never made me feel like a burden to unwrap. Recognition was never denied outright, just thinned out, diluted, spread so wide it never reached me. And sometimes that's sharper than being cut. I never imagined they'd want the credit more than the silence. The email opened like a press release, clean, font-centered logo spacing, tight enough to look official. My name didn't appear anywhere. Savannah's did, twice in bold, in recognition of her visionary leadership and foundational role in Haven Youth. I stared at it longer than necessary, waiting for the missing parts to show up. Founder, program designer, early outreach lead. Nothing. I closed the screen, then opened it again. The sentence still read the same. On my bookshelf, the first draft of the curriculum still sat in a folder marked with my initials faded ink, and one coffee ring near the corner. The handwriting on page 1 hadn't changed. Founder K. Vaughn. I had kept my name off formal filings years ago, partly to protect the program, partly because Savannah said donors would respond better to someone more practiced in public speaking. You've never quite had the polish, Katie. That's not a flaw, just a limitation. I never corrected her. A few days later, the phone buzzed against the windowsill. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Mom says you're being dramatic. Look, it's not about stealing. It's branding. People need clarity. And frankly, women don't get very far when they act bitter. She didn't wait for an answer. just ended with, "You always made things heavier than they needed to be." I didn't respond. I opened the drawer instead, the one with the fire-starting kit from the old chimney days. Inside, the small silver lighter with etched near the base. My aunt's, still functional, still quiet. The invitation arrived 2 days later. White envelope, embossed seal. Savannah Ellis listed as visionary, honoree. No mention of coordination of archives of groundwork. I slid it under the folder. That night, I pulled the curtain closed and turned off the porch light. No need for the house to be visible. I sat at the table, thumb pressed against the edge of the folder, feeling the ridge where the coffee had soaked through. It had dried into a wave small but irreversible. Some people are erased with malice, others with applause. And in the end, both leave the same kind of silence behind. I used to answer quickly, like pausing too long might make me seem ungrateful. The folder was heavier than I remembered. Inside the original draft of Haven handwritten lesson plans, budget proposals scribbled in pen sticky notes that had lost their grip. I wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with a shoelace from a pair of boots I hadn't worn in years. It fit snug under the lowest shelf of the cabinet behind a stack of unused placemats. The voicemail icon blinked red. Savannah had called twice that morning. I didn't press play. I knew the rhythm already. "You're making things unnecessarily difficult. We gave you more than you ever did for us. No one took anything. You gave it away." She always made theft sound like generosity. The text from Mom came after lunch. "Be reasonable. Family doesn't air dirty laundry." I muted the thread, then placed the phone face down under a notepad. The name Elaine glowed faintly through the paper before fading. Later that day I stood in line at the DMV and filled out the name update form in block letters. No middle initial. Just Katie Vaughn. The woman behind the counter looked over the paper and blinked. "Ellis doesn't apply anymore." I shook my head once. She didn't press. The new library card arrived 2 days later in a plain envelope. The laminate peeled slightly at one corner. I traced it with my thumb, then placed it in the empty slot of my wallet, where a photo used to sit. I took the old calendar from the wall. The staples were rusted. A square in July was circled faintly in pink ink. Annual brunch. Confirm dress. I flipped past it and marked a blank space in October. Not for a meeting. Not for anyone. Just to remember the day I stopped apologizing for being misnamed. Outside the cabin, the trees were turning. Inside, I rehung the door hook. The screw had always sat a little crooked. I left it that way. No announcement. No confrontation. Just the quiet math of subtraction. One number disconnected. One folder sealed. One woman less inclined to wait by a phone that only rang with demands. There's no need to declare an exit when you were never invited to arrive. I never realized how loud pretending could be until I stopped needing to be heard. The faucet still leaked, but only when turned just right. I let it drip into a chipped bowl instead of calling anyone. I patched the window frame with wood glue and a strip of fabric from an old dish towel. The color didn't match. I kept it anyway. The toaster clicked unevenly. I waited until the second cycle to pull the bread. No butter. Just a boiled egg, cracked carefully along the rim of a mug I'd once brought home from a yard sale. There was a hairline fracture near the handle, barely visible unless the light hit just right. No one asked what I was eating. I didn't offer. The microwave buzzed when I slammed the door too hard. I learned to close it with 2 fingers, gently pressing it shut like a secret. I fixed the wiring above the stove with a borrowed toolkit and a guess. My hands still smelled faintly of varnish and pine dust when I sat down to read. In the drawer, next to the old matches, there was a letter with the flap already torn. My aunt's handwriting sloped slightly to the left, each loop precise. You don't need to be included to exist, and you don't need to win to matter. Just don't let them shrink you until you vanish. The corner of the page was stained. Maybe tea. Maybe coffee. I didn't try to scrub it. I lit a candle from a box labeled unscented. It flickered unevenly before settling. The wax pooled around the base like it had been waiting for heat all this time. Once Savannah handed me a stack of brochures and said, "Just edit the grammar. It's better if my name stays consistent across all pages." She didn't look up from her laptop. People like stories. They just don't want them to come from the wrong voice. I didn't reply. I rewrote the entire draft and didn't sign it. The cabin creaked at night in soft, familiar patterns. I memorized each shift in the roofline the way other people learn piano keys. Not out of talent. Out of habit. There are kinds of silence that tighten your chest. And then there's this one, the kind that lets you breathe without permission. Some gestures arrive dressed as invitations, but feel more like warnings. The envelope had no return address. The font was clean, the ink slightly smudged near the edges as if printed in a rush. I recognized Savannah's signature before I saw the seal from Haven Youth. Inside the cardstock was thick crimson and gold, almost too heavy for its purpose. The words were already arranged. Keynote, Savannah Ellis. Honoring the vision and leadership of the Haven Youth founding team. My name appeared in small italics at the bottom. Event support, Catherine Vaughn. Not co-founder, not even contributor. Just support, like a table leg, invisible unless missing. Tucked behind the invitation was a short note printed and unnamed. You've been listed as assistant organizer to avoid confusion. Please stay composed and agreeable for the evening. No greeting, no punctuation, just instruction. The next day the knock came. Not rushed, just one. I opened the door a sliver and saw her Elaine standing like she was there by obligation, not instinct. Her beige coat, buttoned high, still held its creases from the hanger, not a wrinkle from travel, not a drop of rain on her shoes. "We're asking for something simple, Catherine," she said, voice even. "Your sister's under a lot of attention. Your presence lends consistency." She didn't look at me fully, just past me. Toward the framed porch, toward the woods. It's about the family. Public image matters. We can't afford tension. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't glance at the half-fixed window above the sink, or the toolbox still open near the floorboards. Her eyes remained dry, like someone talking to an employee just before closing. When I didn't respond, she adjusted her cuff. "You always overreacted, even as a child. This is just a name on a program. Be reasonable." Then she left. The gravel barely shifted beneath her step. I sat for a long while without touching the envelope. When I finally picked it up, the edge bent under my thumb. I didn't smooth it out. They weren't returning for me. They were repackaging me. A placeholder. A name to fill a gap without voice. At the bottom of the envelope, Savannah's printed message lingered in my mind. Just nod and smile. I placed the card in the drawer under the worn flannel I'd used to clean the windows. I didn't throw it out. I just made it invisible. Let them host their reflection. I no longer needed to be in the frame. Some names don't need to be shouted. They just need to remain. The fabric didn't match. One sleeve was from an old curtain I'd kept when the landlord replaced the windows. The hem came from a tablecloth I once thought I'd use for a real home. The bodice held what was left of the dress I never got to wear, the one my sister claimed smelled cheap before it disappeared in a trash fire no one admitted to. I'd saved a piece not out of spite, but because I wasn't ready to forget. I wore it without jewelry, no makeup, just the dress and a thin ribbon tied at the wrist, frayed at the edges. The ballroom was louder than I remembered. Laughter, crystal clinks, familiar handshakes from unfamiliar faces. Savannah stood near the stage posture, perfect, surrounded by the people I used to draft letters for. A photographer angled toward her, catching the tilt of her chin as if it held truth. My name wasn't on the guest list, but my presence filled a space they couldn't redact. Leora saw me before anyone else did. She crossed the room without hesitation and wrapped both arms around me like she'd waited years. You were the first one who ever said I wasn't just numbers. The sentence landed soft but clear enough that a few heads turned. You taught me how to write like I meant it. She didn't let go right away. I didn't need her to. One of the foundation directors, Grant, I think, walked over with a cautious smile. He glanced at the girl still holding my arm. That was heartfelt. Do you have a card? I handed him the one I'd printed the night before on matte grey stock. No gloss, no logo. Just K. Vaughn, founder, quietly. He nodded, turned the card over as if expecting more, then tucked it in his pocket without another word. No one clapped. There was no announcement, no introduction, no, and now a few words from. But I stood there, not as a guest, not as a name on the bottom of a flyer, but as myself. I didn't need the mic. I didn't need their spotlight. I had the thread they tried to burn, stitched back into something I could wear without shame. Some things are erased with silence, not signatures. The envelope came without warning. No note, no handwriting, just the family crest stamped in gold at the corner. Inside a legal draft with all the right formatting, spacing, a precise language, clinical. I didn't need to read it twice. To preserve the family's reputation and avoid unnecessary speculation, Ms. Katie Vaughn has agreed to clarify her former role as administrative support. Tucked behind the letter was a pre-written press statement. It claimed I had no founding role, that I had aided logistics during early phases. It ended with a sentence circled in blue ink. We appreciate Katie's discretion moving forward. A folded check rested between the pages, unmarked, unsigned, but heavy enough to feel like a verdict. The matchbook I used was one I'd kept from the diner where I once worked night shifts during college. Only 2 matches left. I took one, struck it on the brick edge of the cabin steps, and lit the documents in the basin by the woodshed. The flames curled slow and deliberate, blackening my name before the ink of Savannah's could even catch. No one watched. No one interrupted. Inside on the kitchen table, I had laid out the name change form from City Records. A plain manila folder, corners slightly bent, still holding the scent of recycled paper and cold glue. I read it again without touching. Under current full name, it read, Catherine Granger Ellis, under requested legal name. I had written Katie Vaughn, no hyphen, no lineage. There was a space to explain the reason for the change. I left it blank. The envelope for submission was addressed, sealed, and resting beneath a chipped ceramic mug that once belonged to Aunt Rosemary. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Later that night, I placed the now empty matchbook in the drawer next to the stove. No reason to throw it out. There was still one left. I didn't take a picture of the burned pages. I didn't post anything online. No part of me needed it documented. The fire had done what fire does. It left no place for return. Some truths aren't proven. They're lived in silence. and that was enough. Some mornings begin without needing to be earned. I didn't hear a bird call or an alarm, just the soft groan of the old floorboards as I moved barefoot through the cabin. The kettle warmed slowly on the stove. I reached for the mug with the spider vein crack near the handle, white porcelain once my aunt's. It no longer matched anything which made it perfect. I didn't sweeten the tea. I no longer needed things dulled to be tolerable. The window opened with a quiet scrape. Air drifted in thick with pine and damp soil. No breeze, no storm. Just the kind of stillness that doesn't demand notice. On the table sat the latest sketcher hand-drawn plan for a small wooden structure by the lake open on 3 sides. Not ambitious, just real. I had marked spots where sunlight would hit mid-morning. The word shade circled twice near a cedar tree. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a beginning. Leora knocked once, then entered without waiting. She handed me a paper bag with warm waffles inside. No greetings, no updates. She sat for a while, letting the steam between us say what words wouldn't. Before leaving, she brushed a crumb from the tablecloth. "You always fold it the same way." I didn't respond, but I did fold it the same way after she left. I opened the drawer beside the stove and pulled out a small photo, the only one that hadn't yellowed or curled. I was 9, standing on a stool in a kitchen. I barely remembered laughing at something out of frame. No one else in the picture. That mattered more now than it used to. I didn't frame it. I placed it at the corner of my desk, where the morning light would reach it, but never fade it. The phone had stayed silent for weeks. The messages from my mother had stopped at "we tried." I hadn't blocked the number. I simply no longer reached for it. There were no apologies I waited for. No vindication I rehearsed in my head. I didn't forgive, didn't resent. I just stopped dragging what never fit into the quiet I now lived in. The tea cooled beside me. Bitter, yes, but clean. Some lives don't need to be explained. They only need to be lived without interruption.